Welcome to Small Practice Support Information Session number 52. In this Law Society of Ireland recording, Brian Horkin provides Justin Purcell with an update on remote court hearings.
You're all very welcome to Small Practice Information Session 52. I'm here with Brian Horkin from Mason, Hayes and Kern, and today we're going to be discussing an update on remote court hearings. So Brian, you're very welcome. I suppose before we get started, we'll just give you a formal introduction. So Brian has been in practice for 20 years and is a partner in Mason, Hayes and Kern. He currently leads the team who specialise in health and social care cases and prosecutions. He's a former chairperson and current member of the Technology Committee. And Brian, you're very welcome today. And I know you're going to start off and just give us a little bit of a better idea of who the Technology Committee are and what they do.
Yeah, so I mean, Justin, I suppose, sorry, who they are as well. I just wanted to, we always want to stress to people as well, because you can sometimes feel, oh, that fella in that big office in Dublin or whatever. But we have a very good geographic spread, and we have a real mix of we have a real mix of firm sizes represented in the committee. And I have to say that I don't know if I can take much credit for it, but I'm delighted to say that we're almost 50-50 on the gender diversity within the committee, which when I started, the only female involved was the chair secretary. So I mean, I know people didn't want to hear me necessarily talk too much about the committee, but it's been a real pleasure to be involved with. And I said, if I was going to summarize what we do, I had it broken down as monitor, promote, and represent. So what does that mean? Well, basically, we look to monitor developments in technology that are relevant to the legal profession. Then we look to promote them. I mean, we would say that our most popular question has always been around case management systems, and I know that's not what we're about here today, but I would like to point people towards our website. We do keep a list of suppliers there. And we also would say to people, the most common advice we would give as well is that we can't really recommend, and anybody that says they're Law Society endorsed, that's not correct. But what we would say to speak to another solicitor who uses the system and get the supplier to give that to you. And the other thing is, do read the terms and conditions. I know that's the most boring advice you'll ever get, but we've had solicitors say that, they had a big problem with their supplier, and then they only realized afterwards that the contract stipulated English law. And solicitors, when they have a problem, they like to be able to go into the local court and maybe they're access to it. So they were very disappointed with that. So anyway, enough of that. Justin, as I say, the third limb was represent. So we engage on behalf of the society with government court revenue, and that's what led us to engage around the remote courts. Well, I suppose at the start of the pandemic, we probably initiated this contact with a few others. So, like, I mean, if you wanted me to just jump on into that,
Yeah, like the Technology Committee so far has given us a lot of great speakers around other issues around case management software, document assembly, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah.
So just in terms of the genesis of the, sorry to cutting across you there. We'll work on my etiquette, but the genesis of the group, I suppose, was just, at the start of the pandemic, people were just really concerned that, well, for a start, that the sort of total lack of courts, what could happen. And then when things got going, I suppose the limitations of the platform that the courts were using. So I suppose in fairness to the courts, what they did was they fairly quickly repurposed what they've been using as what their video conferencing software. I mean, now it's sounding sort of technical, but what they've been using to get a witness in from England, they then try to entirely repurpose that to hold an entire hearing online. And so clearly there was limitations to that. And this was also being supplied. This was being supplied via, the external AV providers. So everyone was kind of going, so you take us back a year or more, Justin, everyone else started to learn how to use Zoom. Everyone started to use Teams, or everyone had their platform of choice.
Sure.
Then all of a sudden they were kind of wondering, well, why aren't the courts using these? And why don't they have the features that they have? So we got very used to I'm sure you got very used to it, Justin, in terms of presenting. You got very used to being able to mute people. So I suppose I think I had a list written down here about what the concerns of the profession were, but anyone who's on this call who's had the experience, we know what they were. But so I would say there's a lack of features. The system didn't allow you to see even who was on the call. There was no gallery view. There's no strolling with your finger on your phone. It's just you were locked in at that. And then there was also no ability for the host to mute participants. So you can imagine in the early adoption days and the etiquette being at a lower level, I suppose there was sort of a bit of chaos, if we're being honest. And then there was also a sense of what can this be used. So the system was glitchy too. So I suppose we went on a process of a voyage of discovery with the courts, and they were also very forthcoming in engaging with us around, what was possible and why they were using this. So as I said, they were using this system because they'd repurposed an old system, but also they had to integrate with sort of hardware. And I mean, I don't want to be again overly technical, but they had to integrate. Most solicitors will know about the digital audio recording system, or the DAR as we know it collectively, and that meant that they couldn't just start running Zoom calls from the registrar's laptop, which is kind of where maybe the starting point of our ignorance maybe came in. So I suppose
because it's a massive security issue, and it just
so there kind of came around security was a huge issue, data protection. The DAR is they have to record it. There was definitely I know we're in a friendly in-lodge here as well, but there was a lot of sort of maybe rumors, disinformation, misinformation. There was a lot of concerns around certain providers and what protections they provided, and the courts also. So they wanted to be able to stand over and have that sort of externally validated. There's also the question of I suppose they had to train all their staff to use these systems, and they were already trained in the video platform they had, which was I think a Norwegian company called Pexip. Now again, maybe people don't necessarily want to go down that particular rabbit hole, but as it stood, I remember reading an article where Pexip were actively promoting that they were the platform of choice in Ireland, but the version that worked with the courts and it was being supplied wasn't even the most current version of Pexip. So in a way, for Pexip, it wasn't a great advertisement, because you can imagine if you were running an old Microsoft Office application or something, and you're then every solicitor in Ireland is seeing that the system, that's the only exposure they have to your brand, is the thing you were working on 10 years ago.
Okay. So has the court service gone on a journey? Like, are we in a better place now than we were, or?
Absolutely. So,
or is it patchy depending on where you're located, or?
So there's to that point, they have gone on that journey, and they have now got what they were referring to Pexip Classic and Pexip Infinity. So Pexip Infinity is now being rolled out. Some might say, how is it? We're a year into it, and then we're rolling out a product that existed a year ago. But that's very much what's coming down the tracks, and there's much more hope for that to happen there's much more hope for that to happen in the coming months, and that would be more useful for witness hearings. The other thing, I suppose, when we got involved with the remote courts was, I suppose, so it's to bring better features to the profession. The other thing I had was that we also wanted to have input into practice directions, protocols around that, so they weren't sort of overly punitive on solicitors. Just to say that we did make, in a way, we made some progress on the platform of choice, in that the Law Society representatives, together with the Commercial Litigation Association of Ireland, worked with the company called TrialView. And so that's a bespoke company set up by a senior counsel called Stephen Dowling. Maybe a future speaker for you, Justin, but he basically, they had a more customized package, which ended up being used in a number of cases. Now, and we were also very conscious that, you know, we're trying to be member led and things that wouldn't be prohibitively expensive. But his technology, which they sort of built bespoke basis, it provided for all sorts of document sharing, file uploads, case management online, and we managed to trial that and get the courts to approve that as a platform of choice. So what the courts were saying as well is that anyone that wanted to come with a platform would have to, and they're still open to other platforms, but would still have to come with sort of the expression the tech guys use is a service wrapper. But and obviously that's not somebody who's sort of spinning line poetry out the way, but it's kind of, it basically amounted to there'd need to be somebody in some type of technician willing to accompany the registrar throughout the court proceedings. And I think, and I leave other people to make their business pitch, but it probably ties in with other talks you've done, Justin. Like they were able to make the booklets online available to the courts, the participants, and they were sort of, the service was being priced around about the price of the cost of a stenographer a day, and they were reckoning that you could use their service on a sort of, as things stand, on an almost a cost neutral basis if you didn't have to do all the truckload of photocopying and booklet preparing that you have to do for a physical hearing, and which you still have to do for a remote hearing via the court systems.
And so do different courts have different types of services that are allowable, or is it universal?
So that's a really good question. So I mean, and I suppose it kind of ties in with the sort of the courts modernization program, which is something we said we'd sort of chat about. But
yeah, well, maybe we'll leave it to the end then, if you want.
I don't know. I don't want. I think it's always, if this is supposed to be a pleasure for people to, so it's supposed to be it's easier if we take things in the flow. Sometimes works better. But the latest they were telling me this morning is that the court facilities have been upgraded, say in Dundalk and Tralee in the last month, and they're working on. So I think at the start of the pandemic, there was only 2 sort of even Wi-Fi enabled courts in the country. So every day, and I'll try, maybe I can send a link on. I don't know if we're like the fancy American shows where we can put links in the show notes afterwards, Justin. But they've promised to send me on, or else we put it out through the Gazette, a list of where they're at and on that. So the simple answer to your question is it has depended from area to area. And I know Michael Monaghan, my colleague on the technology, was saying that in Sligo there was county registrars travelling from, I think, Donegal to sit in Sligo to do things. But the courts are very committed to pushing that out to more and more locations. So even the just to give you an example, there was a senior on our remote courts working group this morning who was asking about whether Dundalk could get a second video enabled courtroom, because the High Court sits there and they had 2 lists going, and they were getting all the witnesses to fact in person, and they were getting all the experts in remotely. And so this is maybe the future, but they were saying that, look, we'll definitely add them to the list, but we can't prioritize the High Court in Dundalk over, a criminal court list in West Cork that's had no support. So it's kind of a case of, I wouldn't say lobby your local TD, but if you're not, we're certainly, as a committee, we're interested in knowing, and we are getting feedback from people and from local bar associations as to where you're not getting the coverage, and also what you feel you need, what you want. And we've run a few, so myself and I suppose Liam Kennedy, solicitor, but also SC from the litigation committee, we were very keen when the courts, rather than just listening to us committee bods, that they ran focus groups and they've done surveys. So that's all happening and ongoing, but there still is always time for sort of more feedback and, in terms of requirements. So the overwhelming response from the I suppose practitioners is that they want more of this, but they want it for certain types of cases. So really, if we were to boil it down, people don't really want witness hearings for lay witnesses online yet, and that may be because, back to what I started talking about, that may be because of the limitations of Pexip Classic. It may be because we haven't all got there in terms of skill, and it may change. But so what people are saying is, I want to sit in my home office or my office while for call overs, for sort of short matters, that kind of thing. But if I want my barrister to look down the throat of some fella who's telling porky pies, I want to do that in person. In fact, most people seem to be quite happy to have. So they want a remote. They want some things remote. They want some things in person, and they also want a lot of things hybrid. Have I gone on too much there, Justin?
No, that's great. Do you think that we're a bit off universal coverage, though? It seems kind of a little bit. There's quite a bit of catch up. There's quite a lot of new protocols that need to be put in place around witness affidavits, or just the protocols of it, and then the actual hardware technology rollout seems to lag by court, by jurisdiction. Would that be a fair analysis? Or
I think that's a very nice little summary of it. The other thing is,
and I suppose the question then is, how do we speed this up, or how do we make it easier, or is there something that we could all be doing collectively?
I think for us collectively is to, you know that expression for about control the controllables. But I think the nicer we are so we can't control maybe maybe the speed of it, but we definitely, if we're nice to people and tell them that, compliment them on the things that we like, and ask for more of that, I think I think the courts do have a good sense. The court service, do have a good sense of not prioritizing, say, the High Court over the regions, say, or it sounds like something like out of I sound like doing my Boris Johnson on that, but you know what I mean. Over the
they're not looking at it from a hierarchical point of view. They're willing to the more used courts per se, if that's
the more used courts.
Yeah,
exactly, because I think that thing is that there's more applications by volume in. I think you can do stats on this, but it's something like family law and criminal law are like 80% of all cases. But I suppose that the ones that are in the newspapers don't tend to be in those courts. So I think it's about engaging with it. I think we've all got better at it, and it's about actually sort of telling us where you need. It's coming to us as representatives, but also going directly to your local court, saying, well, look, I heard on a webinar that the court service are getting around to all the various places they get into us. So I think there's no harm in that. The other thing is, so you mentioned something about protocols. We're trying to tie in with the remote courts on this, but we were asking about sort of restrictions. Justin, as any solicitor in practice will tell you, that swearing affidavits is a challenging enough thing sometimes, trying to get maybe a doctor or somebody to go to a solicitor and do this, and it certainly hasn't been any easier in the pandemic. The rules were slightly amended to allow this being done quickly, but I suppose, frankly, we've had the discussion at our committee level that it seemed to make things almost more complicated for the solicitor, because you had to be sure of you nearly had to have a checklist, whereas before you could just have somebody help out, a junior person just bring the witness to another solicitor's office. I'd be interested. It didn't bring a lot of ease to any of our practice. So there is a thing that's on the statute books called a statement of truth, but that can't start until there's court rules, and there's no sign of that happening urgently, unfortunately. But there's a sense how all these things are interlinked, and that obviously is that it's almost easier now just to get your witness to. The courts have been very forgiving in terms of accepting draft affidavits and drafts of this and drafts of that, on the basis that the witness will eventually come online and swear at the court date.
Yeah, I know we're coming up here to 1:20, so I'm anxious if anybody out there wants to give some or ask some questions or give some feedback on their thoughts on what's going on in the courts. Feel free to send it in on the chat. I know, Brian, we talked about the future of e-courts and some of the new like payments, like
Sorry, so the courts
filing.
the courts have, like you said, the courts have and obviously the strategies and all sorts of things produce strategy documents, 10-year plans. I'm sure, Justin, you have one for yourself, and for the Law Society have them. But what I was taken by in their most recent slides is that they're really looking for in this, as they have listed as short and medium term projects, which, you know, that's where I suppose where we'd be focusing in on as a committee. And they're talking about digital solutions, online appointments for you know, so you can actually, you don't have to turn up in person to file things, and cashless payments. So again, as a committee, there are things we're definitely looking for feedback and people's experience. Without being, I'll keep on a positive note on this, but we've had, when I talked about our role in representation, we've certainly run into challenges as a profession with, well, maybe let's not name and shame public organizations, but we found that the consultation with the solicitors profession in terms of the practicalities for payments and things have sometimes been an afterthought, and they've caused us, you know, huge grief and stress. And I suppose it's also something that we're kind of lobbying in a way as a committee. We're kind of hoping that the society will be able to, will have the scope to maybe take it on a steering role, so they can kind of maybe ring the Secretary General or the Chief Executive and say, lads, by the way, just when you're talking to consultants, just get us in at an early stage. So the example we had of that in the past was, I think people were making the courts would only accept a credit card as payment, but there was no way to link up the card payment to an actual case, or so it wasn't showing up on your credit card receipt what it related to. It just sort of says court services, €30. So you imagine if you're trying to reconcile that, you know, and you know your accounts person is looking credit card, and the credit card is the only method by which you could do it. So, and the other thing is, obviously the courts don't really operate, they still operate a paper-based system pretty much for everything. So it's all about, you know, how do we engaging with us, and how do we engage the profession so that it does put huge burden back onto our members, you know.
And have you seen any developments on that? Has it moved forward? Have they taken on board some of your feedback?
Yeah, well, I think some of the things actually, I think it kind of ties in what I was reading, or as I was looking at your talks, that Larry and Fenlon, now SC as well. There's a lot of SCs.
Yeah. Congratulations, Larry.
Around. Yeah. Congratulations, Larry, and Jared Groark, who I think barrister we're talking about. So it's hard to know where they're saying now as well, the booklets they want in PDF format. And I think actually, was it, not sure, was it Jared or Larry gave a good explanation of that why, and they want them also searchable. And I don't know if everyone knows what OCR means, but you know, but it basically means that you can search within documents. So that's the format they're looking for, and that's actually quite relatively accessible. And so that's a further encouragement to people to make sure. And I think actually Jared, I think maybe named some products as well, and we can talk about that.
Yeah, Jared from the Paperless Academy.
Yeah, so I'm giving a promo for your other. Go back and have a look.
They're all on the Law Society YouTube channel.
Exactly, but so they seem to have taken on board that the format is they want is PDF, and that works, I think, for everybody, because you know they're not looking for a special system and then it's certain. The other thing as well is, on a practical level, some of the judges are looking for Word documents as well, but that's I think probably understandably they don't have a lot of secretarial support, so they probably won't be able to cut and paste. And I think there's into stuff. So that's look, I think there's a reality about what sort of systems and what capabilities people have, but I say it's fingers crossed on that in terms of and it'll probably be trialed with things like the Court of Appeal and maybe the Supreme Court, and they'll work through those, and then hopefully they'll pass them down to the rest of them, you know.
Yeah, now, Brian, we're just sort of moving into the last sort of 3 or 4 minutes. So I suppose there's 2 big areas we kind of wanted to have a look at. One is top tips for remote hearings, like some of the practical ways you could improve how to make a remote hearing if you're asked to. And then secondly was the sort of the longer term courts modernization, if you had some comment on that.
Yeah, well, I think the just in terms of the courts modernization, a feeling from our committee would be that historically, when the crash came, nobody had any money, and least of all the courts. There seems to be a genuine I wouldn't say that they're awash with cash. I wouldn't think they'd thank me for saying that, but there seems to be a genuine budget for both capital improvement and technological change. So I think it's, don't just think, oh, look, that'll never happen. So do engage. In terms of the top tips, I was going to give a shout out to one of my own colleagues, Frank Flanagan, who is he's a solicitor and a partner in our firm, but he's also formerly a sound engineer. And I thought he did a very nice talk, which you can get by Googling Frank Flanagan remote hearing. So he was very good on things like lighting and sound quality. And hopefully, as I speak about things, I think my own quality is okay today, because it's nothing worse than talking about sound and then putting out on a poor show. But if we were to take my sort of top tip of all those tips, and I think, Justin, we had a chat about this, it's actually, I think I wrote to go somewhere, is Wi-Fi is great, but even better, I just ran a long cable straight out and I bought it on Amazon for 10-15 quid, a 10-meter cable straight out of my router when you're performing. And what I've also found as well, so these are the really bog standard basic thing, but the courts have recommended this too, booklets for court, download them onto the hard drive or the desktop or whatever you want to call it on your computer, so you're not reliant on the internet connection. The other thing is to go into the connection outside of any of your remote, outside of your VPN, because that has more chance of the VPN, if the people's network into their office has more chance of breaking down. I think that was the kind of thing, the sort of most
sound is important,
high value,
also,
boring thing, yeah.
I suppose there's a question there, is how does the public currently have access to remote hearings, or do they? So
that is a brilliant and very topical question. And so what we've been sort of, it was very much a very live, I think we had a 20-minute conversation about it today at the remote courts meeting. So at the moment, the way they sort of, I'd be wrong to tick the box, the way they dealt with that requirement during the pandemic was that they were live streaming into the court. So the public had access in the sense that if they could still wander around the forecourts, which were still open. So I think it doesn't take a genius to say that's not great access. We also had the conversation around why did this come about, and why has maybe there been more limited access to that. So I can give you, Justin, sort of the high level points in terms of what are the challenges there. Certainly the challenges were that there wasn't, we've talked about already, there wasn't a facility to mute, for hosts to mute. So I think they were very worried that if they just allowed people on, the whole thing could be a bit catastrophic. I think there's more of a realization now that as things need to reopen, that needs to be looked at. We were also explaining as solicitors, and again, actually my colleague Frank was who'd work in the insolvency area was talking about this. There's perfectly legitimate reasons why solicitors want to go in and observe other people's cases unnotified. So at the moment, you have to come on and say your name and things. So these are all live topics, and not that that's a non-answer to Geraldine's question. The thing is that people they're work in progress. The simple answer is, I suppose, watch this space, but we're hoping for progress on that. Even talking about, they were sort of saying, can law students access the VMRs? And we were kind of going, well, what's a law student? So at the moment, a trainee solicitor who's down in Blackhole or not in Blackhole, virtually they can access the VMRs via the Law Society website. A student in UCD, not so much. And it's a very valuable part of being able to wander into the court and see a trial. So I think that there's a way to go before, and I think also the courts don't want it to be sort of live streaming by they don't want to be live streaming by default, because they're still concerned about recording. But I think that'll happen. I mean, people have gone into live real courts and recorded and put stuff up on YouTube. So I think there'll be a perception out there that recording courts is a criminal offence, and I think that'll probably be. There's just a bit, maybe a way to go psychologically, I think, to opening it up more. Is that a very long answer?
We're coming to the end of our session. I know that if anyone wants to give feedback to the Technology Committee, they should contact the Technology Committee directly on any of these issues, that you're really open and welcoming anyone who wants to make representation.
Yeah, having been the chair, I'd be delighted to in the past to say that the chair, a proud Mayo woman, Jane Burke, and a proud Sligo man, Michael Monaghan, they're definitely maybe the first port of call. But obviously, I'm happy to field anything people want as well.
Sure. And just Brian, thanks a lot for giving us your insights today. It sounds like it's very much a work in progress.